Are you looking for investments to make you super rich? Most videos are talking about VOO and SEHD to make you super rich. But in today's video, we're going to be talking about something different. We're going to talk about 5 ETFs that can make you super rich, and most people aren't even talking about them. Hey guys, my name is Steve, and I run the Frugal Expat website where we try to help people to save more and invest better. Today we're going to be talking about investing a bit better. So if you like this content, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And we'll continue to create great content to help you to do better. And who doesn't like that? Now, today's video we're talking about 5 ETFs that can make you super rich, and most people are not talking about them. Now, what are these 5 ETFs and what are the criteria for you guys to even consider them? First of all, we're going to look at the expense ratio. Secondly, we're going to look at kind of the holdings that it has. And thirdly, we're going to look at the performance against some of the big dogs in the game. And if you stay to the end, I'll tell you my 5th one, which is one that's blowing up like wildfire. And you may like it too. So let's get on to our first ETF. Our first ETF is going to be SPLG by Spider. Now you guys may have not heard of this because maybe you're thinking of the other Spider ETF, SPY, but SPLG is the S&P 500 ETF by Spider, and it is just one of 2 S&P 500 ETFs by Spider. Like I said, you have SPY, which was created in 1999, and it's got an expense ratio of 0.09%. Now, on the other hand, we have SPLG, which is another S&P 500 ETF. It's got an expense ratio of 0.02%, which makes it way cheaper than SPY. It is cheaper than VOO. And why do I think people should hold this? Well, it's a great S&P 500 ETF that is cheaper than most of the big dogs on the market. Now, if we take a look at the historic performance, we're going to take a look and see how it compares to the other S&P 500 ETFs. Now, if we're looking at the performance of this ETF, we're going to first look at the first year. And the first year of this ETF, it's done pretty well. Basically on par with the S&P 500, VOO, and SPY, but it's done a little bit extra well, and that's probably because it's got a cheaper expense ratio. It is a great S&P 500 ETF that, because of the cheaper expense ratio, it helps add into that total return, and it helps beat a good ETF like SPY. But if you're looking for a good, cheap S&P 500 ETF, SPLG is probably one of the best ones on the market that no one is talking about. So you should check it out. Alright, let's get on to our next ETF. Our next ETF is going to be VOOG, which is the Vanguard S&P Growth ETF. Now, we think about growth ETFs, we think about SEHG, QQQ, and even VUG, with also VGT being more of a tech ETF, but it's also growth. Now, many people aren't talking about VOOG. Now, there could be a reason because maybe it's overshadowed by VGT and VUG and SEHG and QQQ, and that makes sense. Everybody talks about these when you're looking at YouTube and even articles. So let's take a look at VOOG. Now, VOOG is a S&P 500 growth ETF, and it holds growth companies within the S&P 500. So we have a little bit over 200 different companies a part of this ETF. It's got an expense ratio of 0.07%, which is slightly more expensive than SEHG. SEHG has an expense ratio 0.04%. Now, if we take a look at some of the holdings, we're going to see, it's quite similar to SEHG. So let's take a look at those holdings. Now we take a look at the holdings breakdown. We have technology that takes up about 41% of this ETF. And if we looked at SEHG has 45 to 48% in technology. And our holdings is about, you got NVIDIA, you've got Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, Tesla, Alphabet, Broadcom, Eli Lilly. These are some great holdings, and it's got, they only take up about 53% of this ETF, leaving you a lot less diversity within the other holdings, but it's a great ETF if you're looking at growth companies within the S&P 500. If we take a look over the performance over the long term. We'll compare that to VGT, SEHG, and QQQ. Now in the 1 year performance, VOOG is doing pretty well. Once you get up to that 3, 5 year, and 10 year performance, you'll see that other ETFs are kind of taking the leads. And that makes sense because a lot of ETFs are taking the lead because they have a lot more in growth, in technology, which is QQQ's got about 60% technology. VGT's got 100% technology, and SEHG has 48% technology. With VOOG only having 41%, they're not taking really control of that technology part of the economy that's kind of taken off in the last couple years. Now, if you're looking for a good kind of more balanced growth ETF compared and not having as much technology, VOOG could be a great ETF to add to your portfolio. Most people aren't talking about it because they're usually talking about the better ones that are performing much better. And that makes sense. If you want more growth, you're going to look at SEHG, QQQ, or VGT, maybe even FTEC. All right, so let's get on to our next one. And our next one's going to be dealing with more dividends. Our next ETF is going to be FDVV, which is the Fidelity High Dividend Yield ETF, and it's called High Dividend Yield, but the yield's only 2.86%, which compared to dividend growth ETF like SEHD, which has got a yield of 3.6 to 3.7%, it's a little bit lower. Now the expense ratio is 0.16%, which means it's a little bit more expensive than SEHD and DGRO. So if you're looking for a cheaper one, you may look at those other popular ones. The performance is going to be a little bit higher because it's got a little bit more Mag 7 holdings within the ETF, which is going to raise it because technology has been raising in the last couple years, and Mag 7 is kind of hitting that surge. So we take a look at the performance over the 1 year versus the 5 years versus the 10 years. It's going to show that FDVV may be doing slightly better than SEHD and DGRO. So let's take a look at that performance. Now, if we're looking at the 1 year performance, FDVV is doing much better than even the S&P 500. It's got a 22.68% return on the 1 year, which is pretty good and it's beating both SEHD and DGRO. Now, if we take a look at the 3 years or the 5 years, it's doing much better than everybody else. It's got a return of 84.86%, which is beating SEHD and DGRO. Now, it's not beating the S&P 500. The S&P 500 has over 95% in the last 5 years. And we can't go back further because FDVV hasn't been around for 10 years. And so for the first 5 years, it's doing pretty good performance-wise, and FDVV is just often not talked about. But it's got a great performance, which is a good thing. If you're looking for more performance and a slightly pretty good yield, I mean 2.86 is almost a 3%. That's a pretty good yield. Now, it's not got a cheap expense ratio like SEHD or DGRO, but you're getting a good performance in the process. So if you're looking for something that's got performance, a pretty good yield, and a cheap enough expense ratio where you're not complaining too much, then FDVV could be that dividend ETF to add to your portfolio. Now, if we're looking for a better dividend ETF that's got a cheaper expense ratio and it's got a pretty good performance, we look at our next ETF, and that would be DGRO. Now, DGRO is the iShares Core Dividend ETF. Now, it's built to have dividend income, but the dividend yield is quite small compared to the other two dividend ETFs that we have talked about, as in FDVV, and of course, everybody's granddaddy of them all, SEHD. Now, DGRO has a dividend yield of 2.18%, which is quite low, and if you want a little bit more yield, you can look at FDVV or SEHD. It's got an expense ratio of 0.08%, which is much cheaper than FDVV, but also a little bit more expensive than SEHD. But it's got a lot of financials, which is good, as in financials has been doing pretty good the last couple years. And it's got a little bit of tech with some Mag 7 kind of pushing it way up to the top. And let's just take a look at the performance over the long term to see how it compares to the other ones. Now, if we take a look at the performance, DGRO is doing about 18% of the last year. It's doing about 68% a total return over the last 5 years compared to FDVV, and SEHD. And so if you're looking for a good dividend ETF that you want to add to your portfolio to get more Mag 7, DGRO could be that ETF. It only has about a 16% overlap with SEHD, so it's not that much overlap. So if you want to make a portfolio that's got a lot of dividend ETFs, SEHD combined with DGRO could be a great portfolio. And DGRO is probably one that a lot more people are starting to talk about because it's starting to grow on people. I mean, it's a good dividend ETF, but not as good as SEHD yet. So we'll take a look in the near future and to see if, this could be a good one to hold, buy and hold. So if you're looking for a good ETF and you don't want to pick SEHD, well, DGRO is a great ETF to kind of buy and hold. All right, let's get on to number 5. And number 5 is one of my favorites because it's less talked about and it's got huge potential. And that is FTEC. Now, FTEC is the Fidelity Information Technology ETF. It's got an expense ratio of 0.08%. So if we're looking at other information technology ETFs, we're going to look at VGT. Now, VGT has an expense ratio of 0.10%. So FTEC is much cheaper and they look almost like clones. They're literally like the same ETF, but one is cheaper. And, if you have cheaper, you may also have a better performance. So let's take a look at the holdings. Let's take a look at the performance and see how it compares to VGT. You have Apple, Microsoft, you've got NVIDIA and Broadcom making the top 4 of the 10 holdings. And that's top 4 does make up close to 50% of it. So if you're looking for a little bit more concentration in those kind of 4 big companies, well, this could be the ETF for you. Now, if we take a look at the performance, we can see how it performs over the last 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Let's take a look. So if we take a look at the performance of the 1 year, FTEC is slightly beating VGT, and that's probably because of the cheaper expense ratio. So let's take a look at 5 years. At 5 years, you can start to see that FTEC is taking the lead a little bit, and their expense ratio is starting to compound over time. If we take a look at the 10 years, at 10 years, you can see that FTEC is starting to slag a little bit against VGT, but this is the total return, but it's still beating the S&P 500. So if you're looking for a good information technology ETF that's going to be giving you growth, it's cheaper in expense ratio, it's cheaper in price, and has the exact kind of the carbon copy of VGT, well, FTEC is that ETF. And as you can see from this performance, it has performed about 525% over the last 10 years. That's amazing. If you think about, if you put $10,000 in that, it can grow to over $52,000, and that's amazing. $100,000, $524,000. Those are just amazing numbers. So those are 5 great ETFs that most people don't even talk about. Now, some people may talk about DGRO, but people are not talking about SPLG. They're not talking about VOOG, FTEC, or even FDVV. So if you're looking for a good ETF that people aren't talking much about, take a look at this list and let me know what you think. Some people have already commented on my past videos that they like SPLG, and that's why I wanted to include it in this video. So let me know. Do you like some of these ETFs? And do you hold them in your portfolio? Let me know in the comments and let's talk about it. All right. Until next time, I'll see you.